So there's this quote that I love by Eleanor Roosevelt, who was an amazing lady, and she said, "Do one thing every day that scares you." And as I was preparing this talk, people kept coming up to me and telling me that I was a little bit crazy and asking me why would I voluntarily choose to live my life this way. And so I thought about it, and I realized that what really fascinates me and gets me excited is this intersection between our fears and our art and greatness. So that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. So for context, I'm a techie, and so I tend to be much more comfortable with things that are logical, like computers or Venn diagrams, than I am with art or people. But I'm fascinated by art and beauty, and I'm just blown away. I love being blown away by people who just surprise me by doing something or being something other than what I expected. And so I try to surround myself with creativity and hang out with people who think differently than me. And so this summer, I went to the 99U conference, which was this conference for designers, and they had this fantastic lineup of speakers, like Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project. I love that book. Or Brené Brown, who did that incredible TED Talk on vulnerability. And I'm really enjoying these speakers, and they're going to make me a better person and make me more successful. And in the middle of it all, this dude walks out on stage in t-shirt and jeans and biker boots, and tattoos all up and down his arms, and he just starts screaming, "Hey!" and giggling like a little kid. And then he says, "I'm going to talk to you about escaping success." Turns out this dude is Joshua Davis. He's the artist who's done everything from working with dead mouse to having his work displayed at Smithsonian. And he says creativity doesn't care if you're successful or not. But success will fuck with your creativity. Do you ever feel like that? Like you get successful at something and you just sort of stagnate? So Joshua says as soon as we start to get successful at something, the world starts holding us back. Because people only want to hire us or see us doing what they already know us for. They want us to just keep regurgitating the same old, rather than innovating into new areas. And then we wind up holding ourselves back because we want to please, or because it's comfortable here doing what we already know works. And so we get bored, and we stop creating. And so Joshua was trying to teach us how to escape this contentment that comes with success. And the way he does it is with fear. He says he's constantly working to return to this place of fear, because in fear he has his greatest learning, and therefore does his greatest work. So there's this example of fear and art and greatness all playing together, and I want to clarify when I'm talking about art, I'm not necessarily talking about painting or music. I mean, it could be, but what do you create? Code or content or companies? I believe our art is that which we create and put out there for the world. And that uniqueness that we bring to it by doing our own thing, that is what makes the world such a colorful and wonderful place. But at the same time, that uniqueness, that is what makes it terrifying. And so I was talking to my friend Mike Troiano about this, and he has this theory that sometimes, in order to put ourselves out there and do something that isn't what's expected of us, that all we really need is just for someone or something to give us permission. To say, it's okay to go do this thing. But we don't often have that. And so it can be scary to go do this thing that we wonder, is this something that I really should be doing? Maybe I'm not whatever enough to stand up here and tell you guys to do one thing every day that scares you. But Mike says every time we're able to overcome that fear, we practice that muscle and it expands our world. But every time we choose not to do something because we're afraid of it, we make our world a little smaller. And I believe this is true. I love this picture. Have you guys seen this before? I believe there is a lot of magic out there in the world, but we don't get to see it by staying in our comfort zone. So there's this great book about the struggle between fear and art and greatness called The War of Art. And in it, author Stephen Pressfield talks about the resistance. The resistance is this nameless, faceless thing within us that holds us back. from creating our art? It's this ridiculous procrastination where suddenly it's so important that we organize our sock drawer instead of working on our book. It's the self-doubt that tears us apart by telling us that we're not good enough, that we don't know enough, that we're not ready to create our art, that we're not ready to stand up and do our own thing. That's something for artists, for professionals, for other people, not for us. But Pressfield says, the more we find ourselves resisting doing something, the more that's something that we need to be doing. And so we can use our fear as this compass to guide us to what we really should be working on, to creating that art that's going to make us feel proud because it defines who we are, and lets us put ourselves out there into the world as something other than one of just the faceless masses. So the book asks, how many of us develop neuroses simply because we don't do that which calls to us? And so my question for all of you today is, what is calling to you right now that fear is holding you back from? So for me, growing up, the first thing that I really identified with was being a writer. I used to go run off and hide places just so that I could write plays or stories or poetry. And then when I was 8, my dad bought me one of these, and I learned a new kind of writing. I learned to write code, and I became an 8-year-old games developer. And when I graduated college, it was during the dot-com era, and the internet was still so young. There were still so many possibilities for what could be done. Like, oh my God, we can sell furniture and dog food on the internet. So I went to writing code for startups that were leading the way. I was building things that nobody had ever built before, and it was such a rush. But underneath, I was still that writer that loved to go run off to hide and write. And so I became this very heads-down, introverted programmer who I literally would sometimes crawl under my desk to write code just so that I could get away from everybody. And I remember when the dot-com bubble burst, I went from being on the bleeding edge where I felt like I was really making a difference to, I don't know, just feeling really lost. And become kind of addicted to making my mark on the world and to creating things that no one had ever created before. I wanted to keep making an impact, but I didn't know how to do that on my own. But I had these ideas from the work I'd done about how to develop software better, and I thought maybe if I could write those ideas and share them with others, maybe I could make the world just a little bit better. That was terrifying, right? I mean, first off, it's other people. And second off, who the hell am I to stand up and say that I've got a better way? But my company, they had a blog about how to develop better software. So boom, I wrote a post. I was so excited because this is how I was going to get my ideas out there. And I was so terrified because what if people thought that I was stupid? What if people looked at what I wrote and proved it wrong? What if people called me out as a charlatan who really had no business doing any of this? And so I agonized over that post for weeks. But when I finally turned it in, it was perfect. And my company took one look at it and said, yeah, Abby, we just don't think this represents the quality that we're looking for. By which, in hindsight, I can only imagine that they meant this post doesn't look like all our other posts. Because this company, which was not a startup, was very into conformity. And so we all had our little box that we fit into. And I was a programmer, so I could write code, but I could not write blog posts. About this time, I decided I just needed to get away from everything. I had spent my entire life in the DC area at this point. It's where I grew up, went to school, all my friends and family were there. But I just felt like my priorities weren't my own. I felt like I had to get away from the influence of everyone. From my company who had these ideas about what I should be doing, from just this culture that seemed so much about keeping up with the Joneses. I felt like I was so busy trying to meet everybody else's expectations that I wasn't able to just step back and say, what do I want? What's going to make me happy? How can I make sure that I'm spending my time doing things that are important to me rather than on what seems to be important to these other people? And what a silly way to spend your life, right? So I wound up moving to the middle of nowhere to become a hermit. This tiny little town of 4,000 people, the nearest grocery store was 40 minutes away. And someone called it my hero's journey because it was kind of terrifying to leave this place that I'd spent my entire life, that was all that I knew, and yet it was only by getting away from all that I knew that I was able to actually discover who I was and really come into myself. And so I started writing more of my ideas, and by getting away from others, I no longer felt held back by how others thought I should write or think or act. I even started my own blog. I called it the Hacker Chick blog because I'm just a hacker chick, what the hell do I know? And at first it was really scary because it was my blog, and so if I wrote something stupid, it was clearly all on me. But then I realized it was actually a lot less stressful doing my own blog because there's about 1 million billion blogs out there. Who the hell is even going to find my blog, much less read it? And so I was able to feel like I was getting my ideas out there into the world without the actual terror of having people read what I had to say and form opinions about it. But then a funny thing happened. And people started finding my blog. And not just any people, but like famous people. Okay, not like Justin Bieber famous. Like geek famous. So like Jim McCarthy, who wrote the book, The Dynamics of Software Development, which was the book that got me excited about building better technology. And Kathy Sierra, who is my hero, she was the inspiration behind the Hacker Chick blog. She somehow finds my blog and tells me that these days I am the one inspiring her. And so not only were people not calling me a charlatan and telling me that my ideas were stupid, but some of them were actually saying, hey, this is pretty good, you should present it at conferences. And Hermit me, who was at least able to hide away in my little hermit town behind my computer screen, when that is the dumbest idea that I have ever heard in my entire life. But I did it. And I loved it. I loved the passion and energy of everyone at the conference, and I loved being able to contribute back to that. And so I started doing more of this, and before I knew it, me, this heads-down coder who used to crawl under her desk to code, Microsoft came to me and said, we love what you're doing in the developer community. We want you to do that for us. We want you to be our evangelist for startups. And I refer to it as this moment when all of the planets aligned because it did not make any sense. I had this image in my mind of evangelists as rock stars, as these charismatic, outgoing, confident people who were like the exact opposite of me, girl who codes under her desk to hide. And how could I possibly do this? But it was so crazy and it was so far out of my comfort zone that obviously I had to do it. It was like this dare that I took with myself, and honestly, I didn't even take it that seriously at first because it was so out there, it didn't even feel real. But this funny thing happened, which was that by putting myself into the position of evangelist, this position that I perceived, even though I later found out that my coworkers did not at all view it the same way as I did and thought I was a little delusional, but I perceived as being a rock star. This feeling of being a rock star, it gave me permission to go out and be awesome, to do all sorts of things that my previous non-rock star self never would have done. And so I became a bit of a junkie for doing things that terrify me. I eventually left Microsoft because they were awesome as a launching off point, but now I wanted to do my own thing on my own terms. So I opened my very own hackerspace, which was so cool. And crazy, awesome places like MIT started having me come in to talk about how to build tech startups. And I just want to clarify, I did not go to any Ivy League schools. I know it's Boston and all, but that was not me. I was such a troublemaker in high school that I barely even graduated, and I had to spend my first 2 years in community college because nobody else would take me. And now Harvard has made me their hacker in residence for their innovation lab, where I get to help students build better technology. So this is an event I did a couple weeks ago where I brought students together to learn how to do hardware hacking. And so for anyone in the know, we were hacking on things like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and building robotics, and it was awesome and so much fun. But of course, I'm telling you guys about the good things because I like to focus on the positive. But I don't want to paint this picture. I don't want to set expectations that are unrealistic. And the thing is that things don't always work, at least for me, and they don't always get easier either. I believe anytime we're trying to make that leap from who we are to who we want to be, that sometimes we're going to fall. And so like for me, some of the things that seemed most obvious and therefore the most humiliating to have failed at have fallen somewhere very deep down into that pit. So like my hackerspace, I'm no longer there. And my book attempt, which seemed to turn out more anxiety attacks than actual words. But I think it's so important to try, and by doing so, to put ourselves out there into the world. I mean, it's terrifying, but it's also what makes the world beautiful. And I don't think anything compares to being part of that beauty because we're contributing a piece of ourselves back into that. And so I leave you guys with this advice, which you can take or leave as you'd like. But first, never, ever rely on others to help you find your path. That beauty that you create, that comes from who you are, from your own uniqueness, and so only you can lead the way. Second, next time you find yourself resisting doing something that feels totally crazy, but maybe just a little bit awesome, give yourself permission, be a rock star, and do it. And finally, do one thing every day that scares you. Thank you.